Mark Little is the president and CEO of Suncor. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And I did want to start, Mark, with this whole notion of kind of electrification as a big threat. But the bigger picture issue really is the end of demand for oil. And its demise has been exaggerated many, many times in the past. But give me your perspective on how the CEO of an oil company, an energy company, is thinking about that issue today.
Well, it's interesting, Amanda, because one of the big challenges is electricity is a form of energy. It's not a source of energy. And so the question is are we talking about nuclear or solar or wind or whatever it may be, coal-based power generation? And one of the things that's interesting is despite the innovation, despite the intervention by governments and stuff, energy demand around the world is increasing significantly, and oil demand up until COVID has increased year on year, slowly. It's like 1% a year growth. So it's not totally getting eliminated. And if we electrified all modes of transportation, oil demand is still required because it's used for so many different things in our day-to-day lives, whether it's asphalt or other materials.
So we have very specific, we in Canada in the energy sector have had very specific issues before this pandemic. Coronavirus added a whole layer. Just give me a sense from your perspective of getting back to where you need oil to be, both from a demand point of view and a price point of view. Are you confident that we get there in the near future?
Well, I guess it depends a little bit on what you mean by the near future. This has been a massive change, unprecedented globally, where we've literally seen oil demand for a short period of time decline by approximately 30%. And we saw for a day negative crude prices. So this has been a bit of a shock to the system. I don't think any oil company globally is doing well. The prices are a lot better today, and people are starting to get to the point where they're going to make cash flow and be able to support their investments and their dividends and sustain their business. But this is still a very challenging environment. In Canada, I guess there's a couple of things. Coming into this, we felt ESG was super important. So as one of two democratic nations on the surface of the earth, Canada and the US, our record on ESG is huge for us. And honestly, I would put up the Canadian oil industry's record on ESG against any other nation. We have our work cut out for us. Our greenhouse gas emissions are still above that of the average globally. But you're seeing some of our new developments compete now, and essentially the same greenhouse gas emissions as that of the average of the United States. So we've made huge progress. Our journey isn't over, and we will continue on that as we move forward. We need the whole industry for it to stabilize and continue to fund for us energy transformation and those sorts of things. We need prices to be higher than where they are today, but at least we're not constantly leveraging the balance sheet to stay afloat.
And to give credit where it's due, Suncor has been among the leaders in investing on improving your own carbon footprint in innovations and new technologies. And that's been going on really a lot longer than other parts of our industrial base have been focused on it. The next level of that, though, Mark, is we've seen some of your peers say they commit to net zero, including downstream, so even the users of their products. Is that a place you think big energy can and should go?
Well, it's interesting. That's a great question because there's companies in Canada that have also committed to net zero emissions by 2050 or just even to get to net zero. But I don't see how we can do this without industries coming together, without governments participating for us to come up with an overall solution. Okay, so how, if I make jet fuel, how is it that the plane's going to fly if we shut off jet fuel? So I can get scope 1 and scope 2, but if they still end up using jet fuel that's made from oil from Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, some of the other big producing countries. So really what I think is necessary is we all need to work together to try and find solutions. I think you may have heard we did our LanzaJet investment, which is basically taking CO2 emissions and converting that to jet fuel as a way of driving down emissions in that particular sector. So we're very excited about it. But I can't do this for the agricultural industry. I can't do it for the transportation industry. We need to go on this journey together. So for scope 1 and scope 2, for sure we can get there. But for scope 3, I think this is a joint and a complex problem that we all need to work together to find the solutions for tomorrow.
This, all of this conversation about pivoting to a new future comes at a time when, the near future for many of your peers is being thrown into doubt here. There have been calls for support from the federal government because of the pandemic, but including, if we're honest, there were many, many issues for this sector before we hit this pandemic. Has there been enough support? And I guess even where there's been support, has it been kind of backhanded support where Ottawa doesn't want to be seen to be supporting the energy sector?
Well, they've made some very positive steps forward. As example, on the emergency wage subsidy program, that's something that can apply literally to the entire industry, but it applies to every other industry. They've ended up doing some stuff in the orphan well program, which has been very positive and helps the service sector. They've done some things for small and medium size around liquidity and such. The large liquidity program is more challenging because there's some significant constraints associated with it. But also, the liquidity in the markets are generally open, and so there's a lot more liquidity that's available to companies as well. I think it really depends on where you're sitting. Clearly, we're not looking for the government to provide liquidity to us because we can go to the markets and raise debt and do our financing as we have done. But I think there's still some companies in a difficult spot that would say they haven't done enough. But these are very challenging times. And quite frankly, I think if you think for the federal government's perspective, how in the world can they custom design programs for every particular industry and circumstance? So I at least understand why they've done what they've done with broad-based support for all industries.
We saw recently, you would have taken notice of, first among anybody, of the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund deciding not to or de-invest the biggest names in our energy sector, putting you in a category with the manufacturers of landmines. How do you feel about that, and where do you think that leads?
Well, I don't think it's founded on fact, and I'm disappointed in their decision associated with it. And quite frankly, I don't think they've really acknowledged the work that's going on. In fact, I read their decision, and a lot of it was predated to a whole different era, and it didn't take into account the things we're doing. Like, for instance, there was no acknowledgement that Canada, with the oil sands, is the first jurisdiction and only jurisdiction that I know of on the surface of the earth that's going and extracting carbon from the barrel and putting it back in the ground before it ever becomes an emission and altering the carbon content so that on a full life cycle basis, it's equal to the average barrel in the United States. Is that representative of the whole industry? No, but there's several companies now that are doing this. Ourselves, Canadian Natural and Imperial, are using this technology. It didn't take into account things like our cogen project, where we're investing $1.2 billion to reduce Canada's greenhouse gas emissions by 2.5 megatons, which is the same as taking 550,000 vehicles off of the road. And it has a huge impact on it. And it also provides the energy to be able to shut down coal-based power that the province has been working around to get off of that within the province of Alberta. So, if you ignore all of those facts and the progress, it's kind of like, okay, well, then this decision is easy. But I think from when I think about it, and I had this morning to talk to the Responsible Investment Association and all the folks there, is, look, this is about a journey. And if you want to demonize it, great, that's fine. People are obviously doing that. But that's not the reality. We need companies and leaders to stand up, make decisions, and make sure that the future is different than the past. That's our objective as Suncor when we set our purpose as a company to provide trusted energy that enhances people's lives while caring for each other and the earth. We were very serious about it. That is our journey. And we won't let up whether Norges is invested in us or not.